Good morning, everybody. We're about to round up this summit on common good, and we are going to do it by looking into the future, not only because we have been discussing the presidential roadmap, but just because we are willing to think of the next chapter to be written. COP has written the 26th chapter of its history this year. Well, we could try and do the same, and we would be very pleased to launch a new project together with Challenge, a joint project, and this is why Jean Tirole and then Christian Gollier and Philippe Aghion on TV here are going to attend this session. We are going to launch a new co-production entitled The Economists of Common Good, cherished by Jean Tirole, cherished by the CEO of Challenge, of the Challenge weekly, French weekly. And here, week after week, on a weekly basis, Christian, Jean, Philippe, and others will produce articles together with Stephanie Stancheva, who couldn't join together due to the time lag, and Paul Krugman will also participate, and you'll have the opportunity to witness this on a weekly basis in the Challenge magazine. And thanks very much to the three of you for helping me to advertise our magazine, our journal. So what about the roadmap for our re-elected president on the very day when we know about the next government? In your opinion, what about the crucial measure to take for the government? Well, climate is a major topic. We have discussed this issue quite a lot together with Olivier Branchard and Christian. And I think we have to deal with the approach. There is a huge contrast, flabbergasting contrast between those who are in favor of carbon taxation in order to have incentives and to lead far-reaching projects on climate, and the public opinion, the general public opinion who is against the carbon tax. But of course, something has to be done, is to do away with the exemptions which contribute to create lobbies. And border taxes are also a possibility to avoid delocation to low taxation countries for our own French companies. We do need fair mechanisms in order to have the appropriate public funding. And as I said in the previous session, the fund allocation has to be honest and efficient to create partnerships between the private and public sectors. And whatever your opinion for or against nuclear energy, you cannot do without it. Otherwise, it's going to be a real disaster for our planet Earth. A lot needs to be said, but these are the focal points. Philippe, you are a professor at the Collège de France. Thanks very much for joining the common good economist. I know you don't really like this question because it's too, its scope is too narrow, but can you answer? Well, Jean Tirole has just mentioned which pillar should be the pillar for the next 5 years of the president, and Jean will also talk about the retirement topic. Now, apart from the nuclear energy, apart from luxury goods, and apart from aeronautics, France has gone through a kind of decline, economic decline, whereas, for instance, this year, Germany has had several billion surplus in its trade balance, which is not the case for France. Now, you know that to measure the success of the achievements of a country, we take into account patents. And in France, we are only doing well in aeronautics and in luxury goods and in the nuclear sector. To regain some level of leadership, we have to do really something about fundamental research in the United States. Research agencies are well supported, well financed, venture capital is well developed. There is also an agency fully dedicated to defense and space. There is another agency fully dedicated to medical and biotechnology innovations. So we have to revisit the whole system from the fundamental research stage to the applied research stage. Next, what we call the impôt recherche, this research tax. Innovation in France are mainly produced, obtained, generated by small-sized companies, and 35% of this specific tax credit alleviation are granted to large-sized companies. It is a nonsense. Production taxes have been decreased in the last 5 years. Taxation on capital has changed, and but the situation has altogether changed. So we must revisit this tax alleviation and credit and focus it. We must focus it on small-sized companies, medium-sized companies, and not major companies. Thanks very much.
efficient and enabling us to reach our ecological objectives at a lesser cost for the population. I'd like to talk as well about the retirements and pensions, because I have a tradition with my father, who was an actuary in Belgium with the Belgian government in the 70s, and I was fed with these balance retirement schemes and the capability of the states to provide revenues for those who are aged and can no longer work. And we are in a complex situation in France, because the funding balance is not in itself saying that the system is efficient, because if you have mechanisms where the costs are socialized and the profits are taxed, which is the problem with retirements, because the community is going to fund the retirements and the profits are private. So there you haven't got any guarantee in the mechanism that as in France, that we will have a system in which the trade-off between working and leisure time and creation of societal value through leisure time is desirable. And so I think that the president of this country has already shown in the past that he was very much interested in rethinking about giving more value to the work and to labor. And I think that we emphasize too much the development of leisure time relative to general interest and the common good. So what I'd like to propose in our retirement to have a form which differentiates the two dimensions of our modern system, with on the one hand a solidarity base in which you have a minimum retirement that will be funded by the taxes, and then a retirement system which would be based on individual decisions, because after all the trade-off between purchasing power and leisure is an individual personal decision on which there may be some differences, and there are some very interesting jobs, and there are people who have very interesting leisure time, and some people are bringing a lot of importance to their own purchasing power. So all this should be such that the decisions for the best trade-off between purchasing power and leisure should be individual. So what I'm proposing is to have a second pillar which would be fundamental beyond the basic retirement by the state. There would have a point system with a certain age to go on retirement, with an actuarial mechanism based on life expectation, which would be long, to keep the same level of retirement, so that everybody should be able, each euro contributed should give rise to the same amount of retirement annuity, so that everybody should be able to select the system he wants. Now, Christian, I wonder whether the government is going to propose the Minister of Labour post to you, because it doesn't seem to go in that direction. Relative to the retirement, Philippe, I know that you are looking at this very much in depth, and there was in the Echo an op-ed about the Mélenchon's projects about this program of having a totally one-way 60 at year 60 retirement age. Do you fully support with what Christian Gollier said, or would you be more Macron-oriented? Because I've understood that you were not on following the line of Mélenchon. I'm not surprised at because you are a common good economist, aren't you? Well, yes. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that in the report, for the Blanchard-Tirole report, there are very good chapters that Christian wrote about the climate, and there's a very good chapter on retirement and many ideas on how, in the long term, restructure the system of retirement. And I think we have an emergency. And coming to the second point I'd like to refer to later on, in the short term, we should increase the duration of contribution, because we have a balance issue, and we should give a very strong signal to our European partners in order to make a number of investments. And in order to do that, it is urgent that we should increase the duration of contributions, because in order to balance, you should really lower you should increase the contributions. Or lower the purchasing power. That's very bad for the economy and for the society as a whole. So the only measure which is not regressive is to increase the duration of contribution. So in the short term, we should have a trade-off between this duration to do it in a way so that we can bring on board the unions. That would be good, and with a reference to the minimum age, which should be excluded. But looking at the duration of contribution, this is for the short term. But in the long term, I think that the ideas developed in the report are very important as well, and it will have to be meditated for a longer and deeper reform. I hope I've answered your question. Well, I do not know exactly what the report said regarding the retirements that could be advised to Macron. What should he read? Should he read this? Well, Christian and Philippe have already said many things about this. I'd just would like to add one point about the need to have a reform, because today there are plenty of people who are complaining, and Valérie Rabault said yesterday there was no need for reform. Following Peter Diamond's well, there are 4 ways of funding the retirements through social contribution, 25% of your pay slip. So that's fairly high, and is the highest in the world, actually. And then you have the public subsidies, because there are public subsidies as well. And then afterwards, you can lower the retirement pensions. And then afterwards, you have the lengthening of the life expectations. So the projections made are very optimistic, because they're based on growth factors that are much higher than what has been observed historically. So it seems to be very dangerous to go in that direction. Now, also, what can happen is that you will have retirements that are lowered. They are fairly high in Europe relative to, and in France relative to Europe, but then they will be lowered because they are indexed on inflation and not on productivity, so or on wages. So this is going to raise an issue as well. And something else to take into account in the report is that, as in any topic, which is a little bit difficult, you need complementary measures. You want to increase the duration of work. I'm much in favor of that, but also at the same time, people should have work. And we are not models in France in terms of the senior working. You have to make sure the seniors should work. They should want to work, and there are many ways of giving them the urge to work. And they should do half-time and not full-time. And so there are many things to do. And there's also the difficulty of the work. You have to make sure that the companies are aware of the difficulty of the job. And they should think about the well-being of their employees, something they do not do at the moment. Yes, I come back to my second question that I'd like to ask to each and every one of you. I think Mendes France said that to govern is to choose, and if you are a president, the most difficult subject here for the government is to choose, and therefore to select. Christian, relative to the debate that you are going to choose, what is, in your opinion, the greatest difficulty and the greatest debate that the president will have to select? Well, following difficult years of financial crisis with the COVID, where we applied reasonably well the principle of whatever it costs. Now, one of the major difficulties that France is heading into is the fact that we have to come back to financial realities, and we can no longer spend all that money because there's a budget constraint. If we have a loan, we have to reimburse it later on. And so I believe that Philippe was saying, we have to come back, reconsider Maastricht, because there's a number of long-term investments considerations to take into account. If we remain at 3%, this will lead to major difficulties. We also have to come back to the general idea that an investment is socially desirable if its cost of investments is less than the current value of the societal profits that it will generate. So I'd like to put a caveat to what has been said yesterday, because you should have the ability to invest publicly, but then this should be combined with the recognition that the public expenditure has got a cost that has to be considered with the creation of value for the society. And so you have to implement a discipline, budgetary discipline with an evaluation of public policies. Each euro invested in France should create social value at least in excess of €1. And I think in France, although we are the country for the evaluation of public policies, we still have plenty of things to do. Either yesterday with the discussion we had with Pascal Confin on the evaluations of the climate policy. I know there are plenty of things to do. What I said as well concerning the retirement, we have to evaluate the good date for retirement, and after that it's a cost or benefit ratio to take into account, and so on and so forth.
So that means budget rigor and assessment of the public policies in light of the common good. Jean Tirole, what is your point of view? What is your answer? I fully agree with what Christian just said. Inequalities is a real bomb, you know, and our politics have failed in this respect, and whatever the topic is, the various governments do accumulate, delay, etc., do procrastinate, and then it becomes really crucial. But the inequality of chances is a crucial topic in France. Let's forget catching up and things like that. Jean, I think there is a consensus on this in France, but I would like to go one step further and to see what is your view. What about the decisions the president should take? Well, in education, for instance, the stress should be laid on having the appropriate number of teachers in mathematics and literature and science. Are we ready in order to entice them to come and teach, to pay them more? That's a topic still concerning education. I'm sure that you all agree here, but everybody is questioning meritocracy. This is also the case in the States. Some people say that the equality of chances doesn't exist. Well, it's kind of true, of course, but some people that meritocracy is really creating a kind of constant battle and war between people, and it encourages the creation of new taxes. Another point I'd like to stress here is that the notion of dignity. The overruling classes think that they what they have deserved it, actually. This is what they keep saying, but I mean, there is a factor that some people do forget, that some people can be lucky in life and some others are less lucky. But it contributes to the lack of redistribution, and it creates also some level of dissatisfaction, frustration among some classes of the population. And so quite surely the example of mathematics was excellent. And now, my dear Philippe, this moot point, let's say, what would you recommend in terms of decisions to be made by Mr. Macron? I fully agree with what Jean and Christian have said. in Le Monde Daily of today, you can read an article I've written on the excellence, on the boarding schools which have a level of excellence. This is true for education. We must be in favor of a different organization of schools, enabling a proper monitoring, follow-up of pupils and students. Now, in terms of governance, you must have the right tools to measure the results. We must introduce the notion of appropriate performance and appropriate governance and measurement of performance. When it comes to climate, what shall I say? In order to decide whether an EU country is acting properly in terms of budget, I'm changing topic here, the deficit must not exceed 3%. But we all know that in France, the territorial organization and the retirement kind of ordeal account for a large part of the deficit. And because the problems haven't been solved yet you also have very useful expenses. If you invest in ecology, in renewables, in ecological growth, you are going to increase solvency in the long term. If I can increase my long-term production and I will enhance the solvency, and it's essential. Now, going back to energy dependence, you know that it's a real tragedy at the moment for Germany, which is highly dependent, exclusively dependent on Russia. Now, look at what Draghi did in Italy. Draghi said, I'm going on reforming the state, but as a counterpart, you give me the green light to further invest in education, in health, in renewables, in the digital area, etc. So we have to do things simultaneously. Get committed to reforming the retirement scheme in France. This should be done by Christmas, and to be able to invest properly. Well, I'm not going to go back to retirement issues, and I think that you're, simultaneously is going to be appreciated by Emmanuel Macron. Well, of course, we have to put an end to this session and to this symposium, and so I would like to ask you which proposal, which reaction do you remember after being here during these 2 days? Well, I would pay tribute to Margaret, who attended the previous session and who accepted to attend. Margaret Vestager is an egregious European representative, so I wanted to say this, but I would also like to add that we already know a lot, but we still know very little. And when studying these new laws, we discover new emerging problems. This is always the case in human and social sciences. That's why I will be happy to have you all at the next Common Good Summit next year. Now, Mr. Christian Gollier, what would you say about this summit with some young demonstrators who wanted to take the floor and share their view. Yes, of course, it was a little bit disrupting, but it clearly illustrates that we must take into account the issues and the views as expressed by all the citizens, and that's true. There is a kind of division in our society with two different poles. Some people thinking that they cannot take an active part in the public debate, thinking they are totally excluded. So the demonstration we had yesterday strengthened the fact that it's necessary, it's vital to be fully aware of all the challenges, and we must really encourage discussion forums, dialogues with NGOs. This hasn't been done sufficiently lately, and we can do with 3 summits, 4, 5, 6, in order to generate some level of peace among the various societal stakeholders to the benefit of the common good. You are still worried because some people are reluctant and don't trust progress as such. Yes, that's extremely scary. University lecturers, professors, experts, academics, scientists at large were really renowned, and what they said wasn't questioned. Things are totally different. Experts are all now constantly criticized. People criticize their independence, and yet we mustn't forget that we comply with a charter of independence vis-à-vis the potential partnerships, etc. And that's true that the situation has been modified lately, and the people have a mistrust vis-à-vis the experts. Also, we are in a country in which le siècle des Lumières, the Enlightenment age, has been fundamental to our progress. Is playing a major part in the Academy of Political Sciences. One goal being to transform the teaching of economics in France, and I think we should start teaching economics at the primary school. So that they will understand what's going on. People know how to count, etc. They are good at math, but they do not understand the ins and outs of economics. And I think that offering access to the economics fundamental tenets should be quite valuable. Another excellent type of advertising for our weekly magazine, because this is what we are trying to offer to our readers. And I hope we will meet again next year. Meanwhile, do not forget that egregious economists will produce articles for you in our magazine. Thanks very much for attending.